Hello, and welcome to Bear Talk, the go-to podcast for real talk on design and tech. I'm your host, Bear, and today's episode is all lined up to be as straightforward as it is engaging. Our special guest is Ray Tiong, the senior design researcher at Xero. He's got a story that will grab you, starting out in graphic design, leveling up to product design, and now leading the charge in UX research. He's been in the trench of design, rolling up his sleeves, and now shares his know-how with the world through his writing and research work. Today, we're cutting out the fluff and getting right into the thick of it. We'll dig into Ray's journey from design to research, his tips for designers wanting to get their feet wet in research, and his thoughts on where UX research is heading. If you got a hunger for stories of growth, change, and the nitty-gritty of UX, you are in the right place. So buckle up and let's dive into the conversation with Ray. So Ray, I'm really interested about your story from graphic designer to product designer, because for some of our audiences or for the people that not familiar with design, it seems like a same role, like designer. Okay, you have the title, you can design things, but actually no, it's quite different. And I wonder, what was the first, the starting point? You realize, oh, I want to be a product designer, and then what's the next step for you to jump from product designer to the design researcher? How's the journey? Could you let us know, what's the journey?
Yeah, that's a great question, Bear. And I could give you a very kind of clean, structured narrative of what happened, but the reality is it was much more messier and non-linear than that. But let me just start by saying, when I left high school, I already had a passion for graphic design, and I thought that was my dream job and that I would always, end up in a branding agency or something along those lines. And I did a graphic design degree, and I loved it and was really into typography, all those things, as you know. And then I landed my first job at an agency, and the company was great in the sense that it was a great training ground for how to work in a professional environment, how to work in an agency. But I did find that the work I was doing as a junior graphic designer wasn't intellectually stimulating enough. So as an example, I was just really struck by the industry's lack of customer-centric thinking and concept testing. So an example is I would be given, a marketing brief and told, okay, you need to flow in this text into this template. And then I was asking bigger strategic questions, like how do we even know that people want this brochure in the first place? And how do we know that any of the design decisions that we're making will have an impact on ROI? And it seemed like nobody in my company was tracking any of that information. The clients were not sharing their information about how things were performing in terms of marketing and design. So I was asking those questions as a junior and not getting any answers. So that was probably the first sign that maybe I shouldn't be sticking to this craft forever and that I'm destined for something a little bit more. So that was probably my first hint that something was going to change in my career, and I didn't realize how soon it would be. But that was my first job. So as a first time designer in a professional environment, you just want to put your head down and do your time and to get the mentorship that you need, which was fine for a few years, but it became clear that I think I want to do something a little bit different. So I actually ended up studying art history. So that's another piece of my story that not a lot of people know. While I was still a designer, I voluntarily went down to a part-time salary and hours, obviously. And part-time, I was also studying at the University of Auckland, my graduate diploma in art history. And I had a focus on art writing, curatorial studies, And I even did a paper on art crime as well, which was very, very interesting. So the reason I did that was I really wanted to get back into writing again, and I fell in love with art history during my design degree. And at that time, I was dabbling with the idea of potentially moving into copywriting for advertising, because that was also something I studied in university. And even though it's different to academic writing, I still wanted to do something writing related. So that's kind of why I got into art history. And through that process, I met a lot of amazing, interesting people. And I definitely brushed up on my writing skills. But more than that, I developed a lot of soft skills that I use today as a researcher, which was really just kind of critical thinking, structuring an argument, the ability to pull together different sources and synthesize that information quickly so that I can communicate what are the most important parts of the argument in order to persuade or to stimulate further thinking. So I loved the subject matter as an art history student, but thinking about job prospects, I realized it might be quite hard to get work as a curator or an art writer. As you know, the arts world is not always well-funded compared to, private companies and tech companies and that kind of stuff. And I really enjoyed the commercial side of design. So I thought, okay, how do I combine these two together and move into a new field? So my second job in my career was as a brand strategist and experience designer. So basically I was doing service design as well as brand strategy. And I liked the work. I enjoyed being off the design tools and worrying less about the visual craft and being more concerned about the content and bringing strategic clarity to a range of stakeholders. I really enjoyed stakeholder management. And it was also the first chance I got to do some design research. So I was interviewing customers, synthesizing information, and writing recommendations report. And I really loved this type of work. So that really confirmed that, okay, I think I do need to move away from design and pursue a more strategic kind of role where I still get to work with designers and in a design context and leverage my design skills, but not necessarily being on the tools as a designer. But one thing that was lacking in my second job was that there really wasn't enough rigor in what I was doing in terms of research rigor. So I knew that I was carrying a lot of biases in my methods when it came to recruitment and when it came to framing my recommendations. But I had no one around me who was more senior in terms of research experience who could teach me how to do it better. And that's when I sensed, okay, I probably need to move on from this company. And also, on top of that, I wasn't getting enough digital projects. So this was back in 2017 when definitely digital products were growing and there was a rising wave of UX design happening, and I could see it, and I knew that I probably need to move into that space at a tech company or a digital agency. So that's why I decided to move into digital product design before becoming a researcher, because I knew that there was still so much that I didn't know about how digital products are shipped and delivered. And I also sensed that I could, just blend all my past experiences so far across visual design, strategic thinking, writing, and customer empathy, and do that as a designer while learning how to do research on the side. And yeah, I guess the final kind of part of my story before we move into the present day is, I met a design manager at Xero for coffee when I was applying for my job, and I just explained my story to him, and he sensed that I could end up becoming a good designer or a good researcher. And at that time, they had roles for both. And he offered me to just pick one and don't stress about which one you pick, because you can always move later on. And that's one of the benefits of working at a corporate company. You do end up having quite a lot of wiggle room and pathways, surprisingly, to move between departments when you've got a really supportive manager. And at that time I did. So that led me to the decision to kind of use my product design role as a bit of a stepping stone before committing to a full-on research role. So yeah, that's the kind of story behind how I ended up doing design research at Xero.
Wow, thanks for sharing. I have a few questions, but yeah, that's really good to know that the whole journey. I think the first one that is during the first stage when you do the graphic design, like you've been told that, oh, let's do the design like this and be briefed. And this is really typical, right, for most of the designers working in agencies or as a junior. So we're doing that. But it sounds to me that you figure out the fundamental question, like why do we do that? Why we know that this is something we want to do? So this is also like I think it's a major difference between a designer without understanding the problem, just go with the craft, and the designer know, okay, this is the goal, this is the gap, and this is the data to support, and there's no data to support, and then here's the ideal stage that we want to move on. So I think, because as a reflection of myself, definitely that's what I experienced at first. Just do things like make it beautiful, make it look fancy, but then start to figure out, why do we want to do that? What's the reason? What's the supporting point? So that's very important. A question about your art history and art writing, because I'm not I didn't know that first. You mentioned that yesterday, and start to think. Seems to me, Ray, at your current job as the researcher, you're really good at articulate on some insights or some facts or some findings, and make it really clear for other people to understand. So, are there any relationship between the background of learning art and and copywriting, or if there are anything relevant? Do you think that would be like this kind of skill set for writing, for better articulate, that can be helpful, or like for the listeners, how they might be able to like figure out, okay, what could be a way or some tips for improving?
Absolutely, yeah. As I've grown in my UX career, it's just clearer and clearer to me every day that communication is everything in what we do. It's like it's almost as important as doing the actual research itself, because if you can't communicate what you've learned, then your team isn't benefiting from all the research that you've done. So communication is one of those fundamental transferable skills that every UXer needs to possess, whether they're in design or research. And as you mentioned, my art history background and all the writing that I had to do as part of that qualification really helped me hone my craft in terms of writing and being succinct in how I write. And also it forces you to think about how to structure your argument and structure your outputs so that someone can easily follow along with everything that you are putting out into the world. So structured thinking and concise communication are skills that someone with polished writing experience will be able to bring to the UX research field, which is definitely an advantage.
That's right. I think it's probably like need to raise the priority for communication, like on the skill set for designers. And and are there any major challenge, like when you pivot from those critical roles to the other? So could you remember something like specifically, some highlights or some moments?
I'll talk about the most top of mind one, which is the most recent change from a UX designer or product designer into UX researcher. So when I was a product designer, I was used to coming up with the solutions. That was my job. But as a researcher, your area of expertise is no longer in the solution space as such. It's more about framing the problem and focusing on discovery rather than delivery. So as a junior researcher, I had to be quite careful about not being too stubborn or insistent or confident with my recommendations, because I'm no longer the designer. I had to give up that power. So initially in the research team, we had a centralized model for research, and I had to come to terms with the fact that I'm no longer the domain expert in what I just researched. I'm no longer the one closest to the product and the code. So my first research manager taught me that the strength of your opinions and recommendations as a researcher should be proportional to the strength of your evidence. And that's what the research mindset is all about, right? We really encourage evidence-based thinking.
Yeah. Wow, that's. I think that it's also like a good reminder for us to check the evidence, and also, I'm thinking for domain experts, sometimes it's they might think, oh, I don't need research because I already know things, and it could be a good time to reflect why we have those options or like opinions, like, oh, this is I already know that where it came from, and is it really the fact, or has it been updated or something? So I'm thinking like sometimes if you are just know a lot, and maybe you're cursed and you're cursed by your knowledge, just outside thinking on that. Cool. So I think it's also like the challenge you mentioned, this could be a major one. Are there anything that you get from your graphic design background or like copywriting background or experience can helpful for that? Or like, are there any specific skills that you find particularly valuable for your research role at the moment?
Yeah, I think it still comes back to that foundational skill of communication that I mentioned. And communication is quite broad. It doesn't always mean writing, but it can also be visual communication, like your ability to design diagrams that succinctly communicate the fundamental idea or insight that you found in your research. And lately, I've been thinking a lot about the socialization of research and why that's such an underrated part of the research process. Like, so often we get caught up in designing the right process and designing and choosing the right methods and interviewing people correctly or writing excellent surveys, and those are important, of course, but if you don't write reports or insights or have artifacts that land with your audience, like your stakeholders, then you've kind of failed as a researcher, because that's really what the purpose of the research is. We're not doing research for research's sake. We're doing it to inform product decisions. And if your product stakeholders don't understand what you found, or aren't even consuming it because you're too verbose, or you're doing it in a gigantic report that no one's going to read, and you haven't found a way to cut through the noise, then that's a problem as a researcher. So I think a huge advantage of having a design background is my ability to visualize my thinking and create diagrams that cut through that noise and create really creative analogies. So recently I was talking to a lead designer about the impact of my research, and he talked about how a creative analogy that I used, which was something to do with a cafe. I can't tell you what it is exactly, but Bear, you were part of that presentation. So just the ability to use creative metaphors to explain what's going on in a way that cuts through the noise and helps people understand the fundamental insights about that study, I think was really impactful. And obviously kids still remembered that even months, almost a year after that research was socialized. So I would say in summary, my creative background and ability to visualize my thinking has helped me create assets and new frameworks that have cut through the noise with stakeholders so that they walk away with a clear understanding of the most relevant insights.
Wow, because I'm following this idea on visual thinking, because for some of us, maybe for me as well, at first it sounds like only make things visualize things, maybe create a diagram or graphic, but you also mentioned something like analogy or like a metaphor for that. This is also like, even by verbal, it's still like you are visualize something in other people's mind that they can imagine, that they can have a vivid image in their mind, and that's really helpful and that's really powerful as well, so that people can see, oh, yeah, now I know. And also sometimes that can inspire them, because if you show something like, okay, if you do this and this scenario will happen, and people will start to, oh yeah, that's really powerful. Let's aim to create that. So yeah, I think it's more like visual is not only about drawing or like use Figma or Miro to create something that you can see, but it's also like make people excited, and also they can connect things in their mind. So yeah, that's my takeaway. But yeah, thanks for bringing that. Right, love it. A question about that is, some of my audience, some people is listening, maybe consider, oh, researcher sounds like a really great role. I want to explore, and also, but I don't have a formal background, like I don't learning research in uni, and yeah. So what advice would you suggest that people are looking to make this similar transition into UX research, into product research, and yeah, and also any strategies or any resource that you can share?
Yeah, that's a great question. And first of all, I want to say that I, as someone who is a serial career switcher, I have a big passion for helping other people considering their career moves and their career switches. So I'm always happy to talk about this. And I have been chatting with a few people recently about what that might look like. But I do have a few different ways of answering your question. The first thing I want to talk about is going back to, I guess, the theme that I can already sense a theme of our conversation today is those fundamental transferable skills that you need to succeed as a UX person, whether you're a UX designer or a UX researcher, which is communication, first of all, but also that curiosity and critical thinking and ability to put together a cohesive argument. Like you won't get very far in the product world with strong-minded stakeholders across engineering and product and marketing, etc., if you are not able to tell a story that is grounded in evidence and logic as well as compelling emotion. So I think anyone who has experience or strengths in storytelling, creative thinking, and communication and critical thinking will be able to thrive as a researcher, because I believe that those are the core skills and attributes that you need to do well in this space. So even if someone doesn't have a formal background, like they may not have gone to university, that really shouldn't stop anyone from trying to make it in this space, because, as I mentioned, those fundamental soft skills are the biggest parts of the job, especially in UX research. So I hope that encourages people out there to give research a go. But then again, to counter that point, I want to be really honest about the context that we're in right now. Yeah. So, since a few years ago, with a lot of big world events happening, politically as well as in the economic space, we've seen a lot of tech layoffs and a lot of UX teams shrinking, and UX researchers in particular seem to have been disproportionately affected. And that's still continuing here in 2024. So I would say that the job market for UX research, in all honesty, isn't amazing right now, especially compared to a few years ago. So let's acknowledge the fact that not everyone has the privilege to make a career change right now, and that's okay. We all have different financial situations, and we all have different amounts of risk that we're able and willing to take. So I don't think there's any shame in just holding off for a little bit longer and keeping your day job while you learn about UX research from other resources. And we can talk about those resources a little bit later. But yeah, I do think it's important to just consider your own context before making the leap. And just because, one person says something on a podcast that inspires you doesn't necessarily mean you need to jump in with both feet. Just be smart about it and take calculated risks. So do your research. And I do feel like a bit of a hypocrite saying this, because when I moved into UX for the first time, I probably didn't do enough research. I did very high level research, but I was probably a little bit optimistic. But at the same time, I learned so much through those trials, and I wouldn't trade that experience for the world. But my advice is really to take some calculated risks. And just coming back to this concept of, keeping your design day job while you consider research. If you are already in UX as a designer, you would likely have heard of this trend of democratized research, where designers and even PMs and other people like product marketers are being encouraged to do their own research because of shrinking UX research teams. And that provides an opportunity for UX designers to practice those research skills. Even though they may not have an official research title, it's still an opportunity to practice those skills and to do better every single study that you lead, on your way to officially becoming a UX researcher once the market kind of picks back up. So yeah, that could be the best of both worlds. If you happen to already be a UX designer, there could be some opportunities to put your hand up and lead some more studies, or take a more active role in studies and practice those soft skills that I mentioned of communication, critical thinking, and creative visualization of your insights, rather than purely being a consumer of research.
Yeah. That's a really good takeaway, Ray. Because for me, I think it's also, you mentioned really two really important points. First is those skills, like those soft skills, actually is the things we need to practice and need to be upgraded into the next level, and also it's not affected by trend or by time. For example, communication and visualize stuff, and also like critical thinking. So this is also like not only relevant to designer role, it's also like most of the role, teachers, right, and managers. So everyone can do that and can be benefited by those research methods. So yeah, just if you're interested, just find a way, find some resource to practice, to upskill it. And the other thing about the market, because I feel that it's also like there's still opportunities, but yeah, realistically, it's not as good as a few years ago. And I don't know if this is the beginning of an area like going down, or like maybe just still like as a curve, ups and downs. But there might be good to do some proper research about your own career, because this is a big commitment. But on the other side, if you already, like you mentioned, right, if you already work in this industry, if you already work on some design related jobs, so why not to learn something, or to start to use some research mindset to help you work, to help you become a better designer. So that smoothly move to our next topic, advice for designers or for professionals without formal research background. And I'll start with this question. So yeah, for people without a formal research background and they're interested in UX research, where should they start? Like, what's the starting point? And then what could be the fundamental steps that would you like to recommend?
Yeah, I can really only speak from my experience as someone who has a very particular learning style, so I want to acknowledge that. For me, I love to read a lot and absorb all this information from a variety of sources before I try something completely new, like a career pivot. So in my case, one of the first books that I was recommended was Erica Hall's Just Enough Research. And there was a second edition that was published a bit more recently, which has updated information. So I would really recommend anyone who's interested in UX research to get a copy of Just Enough Research by Erica Hall. You will be able to Google that pretty easily, I think. And that is a seminal text for anyone interested in modern day research, where we are asked to be quite pragmatic rather than, fully academic and rigorous in our work, but there is still some level of rigor that is needed for the data to be reliable and helpful in a product context. So that was my kind of gateway, or one of my gateway avenues into UX research. But I also did a few online courses as well. That was actually after I got my UX research job at Xero, and I was very, very grateful that we are given professional training budget to buy subscriptions to online courses and that kind of stuff. So when I was a junior designer, I got a subscription to the Interaction Design Foundation and took their courses on research, basically. And a lot of it was stuff that I roughly knew, but it was nice to have a short course that allowed me to progress in my own time and get familiar with some of the artifacts and the processes and details of what I would be exposed to as a researcher. So yeah, that was a really great introduction into the field as well that I was able to do in my own time.
Yeah, I love that. I love the idea of, because I'm still subscribed to it. And the latest one they just got for AI for designer course. That's also quite interesting. Good to like spend a couple of hours and then get a fundamental understanding of one field, and then can start create our own plan. So yeah, just enough research and some online courses for learning research. So
yeah, and not everyone will be like you and me, Bear. Like a lot of people will probably want to learn by doing and get thrown into the wild and do freelance projects, and that's also a valid path. Yeah. I guess what stops me from doing that or advising that too much is that I think when you are starting out in a field, you don't know what you don't know. And if you do not have a mentor to guide you on some bad habits that you might be picking up, you might end up with, doing some things that might create harm or could set up your stakeholders in a really bad way, in a really efficient, or do things in a very inefficient way. And you won't necessarily know that unless you've got someone more senior than you in the craft who can mentor you and point out those mistakes. So that's why I was a bit more conservative with wanting to, position myself in a company that had decent researchers I could learn from first. And I'm very, very grateful from all those colleagues and friends who helped me in that process. But I guess that's what would be one of the trade-offs with freelancing, where yes, it's great to kind of get started, get real world experience, but also if you don't have someone more senior than you critiquing what you're doing and quite closely, then you might end up picking some pretty bad habits.
Yeah, and just thinking like it sounds like someone just go to the gym without understanding all the equipment and how to use that, and don't have a personal instructor, and just weights, let's leave it, and then get hurt. But still, he or she might get benefit, or they might build their muscles. By learning by doing it, but it would be good to, like on the other way, to have some structural learning for that. At least maybe just read the book and then get some proper understanding of all the things, and then start to implement things on your work on the project. So that would be could be a good starting point. Speaking of that, if people start to think, I want to do something for my own current project or current work, I want to implement some research methods. So what would be your suggestion for them?
Yeah, I think when I hear people considering doing something like that, my mind goes straight to the fact that there's different types of research, and so you don't always need to do new primary research, which is often what we think of when we talk about research, like, I want to interview some people, or I want to launch a survey. It's like, well, actually, no, you can do secondary research, which is desk research, like just figuring out what do we already know and investing time into diligently combing through existing insights and existing data, and what have other people in relevant industries or companies published, on the internet that is widely available to you. And so just being able to synthesize that and critically analyze what you're seeing and re-communicating that's using those soft skills that we talked about, right? Like critical thinking, creative communication if needed, and also just clarity of thought in your writing and your, making those insights land with your stakeholders. That's using research skills and having a research mindset, because again, a research mindset is all about evidence-based thinking. And it doesn't matter if that evidence came from you or it came from someone else, as long as it's relevant to your problem, then it's fine. And you are exhibiting a research mindset and research skills. So I would say perhaps desk research is an underrated avenue into sneaking in some research practice.
That's great. Because I'm thinking this is also relevant to a question I want to ask, but since that you already answered that, as the evident thinking, that could be the one thing we might able to implement, no matter what you're doing, but you want to implement research methods, research mindset. So consider evidence, and make sure that it came with some supporting data, or it's backed with evidence. I'm thinking it's also quite interesting, the desk research. It sounds to some people without design or product background, it's actually more like when you watch a TV show, a detective usually just get a large wall, right? And put all the things on the wall, stick all the things. Oh, this is the suspect, and there are 5 suspects, and okay, this is the area they used to come out, and also this is the restaurant, this is the crime scene, and what's the connections, and everything's based on the fact that they found from somewhere. And they usually don't start from the scratch, right? But they find something and they find, oh, here's something's missing. Let's find out, and just go to the field, find something, and do some investigation, and then fill the gap, and then make the conclusion or something. So I think it's more like a similar. But if you're doing something like for design, it's also like, don't start from scratch. There already something. Even you're working on a new project that you don't have any mentor in this field, but still maybe some competitors already published something or already share something, or at least there are some existing stuff on out there that you can find. Maybe do some proper search, and then collect all this information together. So
and that really circles back to something you said earlier today, which was, there is a difference between graphic design and product design. And that was one of the biggest things that I learned in my first year here at Xero, where I learned the importance of patterns in UX, and the fact that we should be reusing familiar patterns rather than reinventing the wheel, or inventing new patterns that people might not understand, because our field of user experience is all about creating intuitive interfaces and experiences that will allow people to do what they need to do, almost without even thinking about the interface. It should be so easy and frictionless in the right context to achieve what they need to do. So that's quite different from marketing and brand design, which is often about novelty and how do you do something different that stands out. And there's still, a case to be made for sometimes you do need to break the pattern and you do need to do something a little bit different. And I'm not saying that there's no overlap, but I would say that's one of the fundamental differences between the two fields, is that what we do is a lot closer to engineering and systems thinking, as opposed to pure creativity and fine arts.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great point. Right, Chris, it sounds to me like one question is about the difference between art and creativity and design, right? But that's a really big topic. Let's leave it for now. And the other one is that if you consider some terminologies in design industry, mental model, don't make me think, cognitive load, jobs to be done, they all have this similar point, or they're actually talking one major thing, that people don't want to spend more effort to complete something. The less effort, the better. And mentally and physically, that's always, it's more like an engineering problem, right? So if you want to move something to some place, like move a car to a higher place, that's also an engineering problem. So the less effort for doing that, the better option for that. So I think it's more like those things those different terminologies or different methods is all aimed to help people to solve some actual problems. So it's not to so our product or like the design is not the end goal. It's not the purpose. The purpose is to help them. And I think that could be one learning that I got from this conversation. That's really helpful. Right. We talk a few things about this, about the current problems that a designer might have for doing research, and some of your previous experience and on different roles. Let's talk about the future. So speaking of that, we know the trends happening now. The market's not going well as a few years ago, and also AI seems like try to disrupted every industries. I just shared this last year this time. I didn't think that design or even coding could be impacted that much, because it sounds like there are still many human factors, many things that we need to take control, right? So it will helpful, but it will not that impact that much. But now this year, I don't have that confidence anymore. It's more like, seems that they can do better. It can do better, and and also maybe the business can. It's relevant to the point I mentioned, that it takes less effort for the business by using AI or by using this new technology to support, which means that they don't need to hire more designers or as much as designer or researchers as before to get things done. So I think that's the future we were aiming, and it seems that it will happen anyway. And I think speaking of that, are there any, what do you think on that? And are there anything that you feel, maybe not, that's not the right future, or I'm thinking something different, or are there any suggestions or something that you're planning for dealing with this type of future?
Yeah, I think I'm on the same wavelength with you. I think my thoughts about AI have changed quite a lot in just 12 months as well.
Right.
And one of the reasons I got into UX research was because of I can future-proof myself, and no robot will ever be able to do what I do. And we are already seeing a lot of quite controversial AI tools that trying to replace UX research altogether, which I won't discuss in detail here, but it is very interesting. And I guess my current stance on it is researchers should be embracing AI tools as a way to augment their practice rather than seeing it as a threat that will 100% replace us. I think AI is able to handle all the boring parts, the really manual labor parts that we don't like to do, like cleaning up transcripts, hopefully, even though I haven't had great success with ChatGPT, to be honest, on this, but things are a lot faster than they used to be, for sure, which is nice. And so we're heading in the right direction. So, figure out where can AI speed up your workflow. But when it comes to actual synthesis, I think we can start. I'm open to experimenting with AI to help me as a synthesis partner here, but ultimately, I do think the human needs to be involved and critical thinking skills, those transferable skills that we bring as humans, especially from an arts background. We need to be applying those to what technology is giving us. And as we know, no AI tool is going to be free from bias. It's going to have the biases of its creators embedded into its systems and its models. So we should always carry this, I guess, healthy skepticism about how much AI tools can really help us when it comes to connecting the dots and curating information to cut through the noise in our own orgs. So again, coming back to different parts of the research process, like socializing the work, I don't know that we should be delegating that to AI 100% because I'm the one who has the relationships with the stakeholders.
Yeah.
I know what's going to work for them because I've been working with them, getting to know them, going out to have coffee with them and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I don't think an AI tool is going to do that, but happy to be proven wrong.
Yeah, I think this part I don't think can be replaceable, at least in a few years, because humans are human can sense other humans' experience or feelings, and we can empathize with other people, right? So yeah, I think for this one, it's more like something you mentioned, the evidence thinking, and it's especially important at this stage, and also like the critical thinking as well, because AI now, it's not only creates some bias, it's worse than that. It made us making up things, right?
Hallucinations.
So, yeah, hallucinations, and seems that's not a small problem to solve, to be solved in short time. So which means that we cannot fully count on it, like especially count on the result it's generated. Always need to check the facts and be have some critical thinking on that. Is it true? Is it actually real? Like always do the fact checking, and yeah, but using it to do the boring work. I think that's as a next step for everyone, that we can start to think, for your role as a designer, as a researcher, or as other part of the business, how we might able to use it to help us to set us free from those tedious jobs. Yeah, because I think that could be the next stage, right? Cool. Are there any? I think consider time. We already talked 1 hour, so that's really a really great conversation. I just asked one about this. So in this field, in this rapidly evolving field like UX, staying current is crucial. And what advice do you have for professionals to keep their skills and knowledge up to date?
Yeah, my advice is actually to almost think. I have a bias towards long-term thinking and long-term benefits. So I would focus on those fundamental soft skills, as we've been talking about throughout today, that don't really change with trends. So understanding cognitive biases and other parts of human psychology and behavior, I think those are not really going away anytime soon. So that would be kind of my fundamental go-to if you are thinking about UX, like understand humans. That's always going to be relevant and important. So yeah, if I were to focus on any one thing, it would be that, as opposed to UI trends and that kind of stuff. But that being said, I am glad that we are talking about technology shifts like generative AI and its potential. So there is a bit of balance there. We don't want to bury our heads in the sand and ignore the potential, or resist technology just for the sake of being conservative. Those are the factors that are balancing in my mind at the moment.
Right, that's great. Cool, right. Thanks everything for you shared during this conversation. I think we've got everything, but just one more question, because for the audience, today is the last day that Ray stay at Xero, and he'll go to UK to start a new journey, a new adventure. I might cut it off, as the off the record. But are there anything that you want to say to us, like to Xero colleagues? Anything you want to say? Maybe not. I don't think it's a suggestion. But yeah, in general, anything that you want to say to them.
It's a very broad question there. So yeah, I feel like I've said what I need to say to the different teams and leaders and colleagues who I've been working with. But obviously, I'm very, very grateful for everything that I've received at Xero, all the opportunities I'm grateful for my managers who had my back and enabled me to have my start in research as well. That was a huge goal that I was able to meet even sooner than I anticipated. And I'm so grateful for all those mentors who helped me with my craft. And now I have the confidence to go overseas and try something new and put myself out there and see what happens. So for that, I'll be forever grateful.
Cool. Thanks, Ray. Because I know you're going to UK a few weeks ago, a few weeks later, and actually a few days later, right? So I might not able to meet you soon. Maybe probably I'll go to UK or you'll visit your families in Auckland. So I just want to take this opportunity to say, thanks, Ray, for everything that you shared in the recent years and at work, and also I really enjoyed the conversation and catch-ups with you and during the Teams event, and also some coffees. So all the best on your journey, and keep in touch. And if you need anything, or if you want to share, or if you have some updates on your career, let us know. Let me know.
Of course. Thank you so much, Bear. It's been a pleasure, and thank you for having me on your podcast.